Hello, everybody. Welcome to this event where we are going to be discussing returning to work during COVID and covering everything you need to know. My name is Margaret Ann, and to my left, I can never tell which is Purdy, who is our head of program at TechHub. A little bit about TechHub. We are a community of over 400 tech startups. Usually we're based in Shoreditch. Our office is now open, and we also have some teams working remotely as well. Within our community, we also provide a really comprehensive growth program to help the startups grow and scale. We do investor coffee mornings, we do workshops, we do special Q&As with topic experts, and we do a lot of special community events as well, so our founders really get to know each other and really get to benefit from the incredible network that we have. Quick note on upcoming events: whether you're a TechHub member or not, we do have a fireside chat next week, or a virtual fireside chat with Pip Jameson, who is the founder of The Dots. It is on July 14th, and more information can be found on our website, or if you just type in TechHub Eventbrite, you'll also be able to find the information in there. When we send out the little follow-up email tomorrow with where you can also get a recording of the discussion today, we'll post a little link to that event if you're interested in it as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Purdy.
Hi everyone, I'm Purdy. For any of you that haven't met me before, I'm head of program at TechHub. So we run about 200 events every year as part of our growth program. Covers introductions to investors, help finding a great team, help getting product feedback, introductions to some of our partners, one of which you'll be hearing from today, as well as other things. So as Margaret Ann said, you can check all of that out on our website, techhub.com. Today's event is all about returning to work in the COVID-19 world. So obviously as a community and having lots of tech startups who are all based out of our building, we've got 400 businesses in total. Questions are now starting to arise about what it means to actually come back. What does the new office environment look like? How can you make sure it's safe? How can you make sure you're covered and your staff are covered if they're looking to start coming back into the office? So we've got an awesome panel who are going to help answer these questions. We're going to get them to introduce themselves as well, but we've got Alex from Hiscox, who is one of TechHub's partners, who's going to be answering questions on insurance and risk and that kind of thing. And we've got Merlie, who is the founder of LegalTech company Farillio, who are also TechHub members, who's going to talk a bit more about the legal side. We've then got Michael, who is our facilities manager at TechHub, and Michael's going to talk a little bit more about what we've done at TechHub in our building to make the building safe for our community. So I'm going to introduce them now. Myself and Margaret Ann are then going to disappear. They're going to do a quick introduction to themselves and just start by having a conversation about some frequently asked questions that they've got. And then we're going to turn it over to questions from the audience. So we've got some questions lined up that I'll be asking afterwards. But if you do have any questions, you can use the chat panel on the right-hand side of the video here, and we will make sure to answer any questions that you've got. So I'm going to add them in now. Where's Merlie gone?
Hey.
It's like magic.
Are we all good?
I think so.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Michael. I'm the facilities manager at TechHub. So as Purdy just mentioned, I'm going to go through a couple of things that we've implemented around the building and around the space to make sure that our members, guests, and our TechHub team are kept safe during this time. So that's what I'm going to be discussing today. Do you guys want to introduce yourself, or?
Should I go first? It's a bit awkward, isn't it? So, hey everybody. It's a shame I can't see you because I'm sure I'd see many familiar faces. I hope you guys are all okay. I'm Merlie. I'm the founder and CEO of Farillio. Started the business in TechHub, love what you guys do. I'm going to be the voice of all the experts that we've been interrogating basically over the last 4 months, particularly about anything COVID related, but in this context, getting people back into the workplace, the anxieties that as individuals and as businesses that we have. So while I no longer advise myself, the great advantage of sitting in my job is that I get to interrogate all the experts, collect up all the answers. So I'll share with you what I can today, but all the actual legal advice and a lot of other guidance is on the site too. So looking forward to it.
Awesome stuff. My name is Alex. I'm from Hiscox. I've been underwriter at Hiscox for over 10 years, but for the last few years, I've been mainly specialising with early stage tech startups and helping them understand what risks their business might be facing today, but also forecasting how those things might change over time as well. So I've moved away from the actual day-to-day underwriting sales element and just have this unique position where I get to sit amongst co-working sites and business accelerators and just work with founders or founding teams to help them understand what it is they might need, whether they're insured by Hiscox or not. We've been a partner with TechHub this year, and yeah, this was just a great opportunity to kind of think of it as, look, there's a lot going on, there's a lot changing. This is a pivotal moment for a lot of businesses. Now's a really good time to review a lot of things that you're doing from a risk management and insurance perspective. And I can just be a little bit of a voice from that as to, well, these are the type of things that we are seeing. These are the type of things that I would expect businesses to be looking at. Cool.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to talk now about our space at TechHub and what we've implemented. So we've done a lot of work recently behind the scenes and around the space. Usually we find we could have up to 1,000 members in the building at one time, obviously with the social distancing guidelines that the government has set out. There needs to be room for movement around the space and allowing the flow of traffic to support the safety of our members and our community. So what you can expect from coming into the space now, we've got one-way systems, cleaning stations, hand sanitizers everywhere around the building, as I'm sure everyone loves the hand sanitizers at the moment as much as me. Our team are being trained to be using PPE equipment, and we expect the members to do the same. We've reconfigured the space as well. So we have 3 tiers of different memberships at TechHub. So the Flex membership, which is the co-working option on the ground floor and the second floor. And we've reconfigured that space to allow the Flex members to use more of the building so that we can spread everyone out more. The resident desks have been spread out to allow the social distancing. And then also in the team spaces, we are offering support to all of our team members who need some advice around, again, reconfiguring their areas. We are working on the risk assessment, so highlighting any risks that people will face. I think an important thing that everyone needs to acknowledge, especially being in London, is the travel part of people coming into the space and out of the space, and so focusing a lot of energy on that. We have been in communication with all of our members and the wider community to ensure that everyone helps each other out here. I think we're all, it's all a bit of a foreign land for everyone, and everyone's we're all taking it day by day, but as the restrictions start to ease, we all need to come together at this point. So we ask all of our members to let us know when they're coming back to the space for the first time. We have found that more and more people have started coming into the space, which is really good, and everyone seems to be appreciating the restrictions that we have put in place. So things at TechHub are looking good, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me. I think.
Oh, Purdy appeared and disappeared.
Yeah.
She's back.
a little bit buggy today. StreamYard, most of the time it's really, 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 really good, and we'd really recommend using this tool if you're using live streaming stuff yourselves, but today it's just a little bit buggy. So if anyone does disappear and come back, that's why. Before we move on to the questions, and I'm going to kind of curate the questions, I just wanted Alex and Merlie just to have an opportunity to chat about any frequently asked questions that you guys get, to see whether it inspires any founders or any team members that are listening to this conversation to think of any other questions that they might not have thought of yet. So with the conversations that you've been having so far, what are the kind of key topics that are coming up?
Alex, do you want to kick off? I went first last time, so
I will
fair
kick off,
play.
but feel free to jump in whenever you want, Merlie. Okay.
Will do.
I get quite a few questions about this stuff, but they are mainly falling in one or two brackets, which is either it's how is this going to affect clients or customers, and how is this going to affect my employees? So I'm thinking about bringing employees back, and that could be back into the workspace, but it could be them doing client visits. There's lots of tech companies, for example, will have people on site at their customers, and there's concerns around, well, what happens if one of my employees was to get ill? What if they were a contractor that I'm using? How does that look? What happens if they go on site and make someone else ill? What if they get ill from being on site at somebody else's location? And there's all sorts of risks that go along with that, all sorts of things you've got to consider. But they're the questions that I'm getting, that I get most, is around actually someone getting sick themselves. That seems to be the main port of call. And as a business, what do I need to do in order to protect them correctly, but also protect that I'm doing the right thing? Because there's an implication. I can get into the nuts and bolts of the insurance, but there's implications on the sickness to the individual across a couple of covers, and there's also how that business has gone through the process of managing the bringing them back to work as well. So that's generally speaking where I get the questions, but I can delve into that a bit further. Unless Merlie, there's anything you want to pick up as to something you're hearing?
No, it sounds familiar. We have a bit of a pot, and it seems to go round and round in circles. I don't know whether people are prodding each other and sort of, inspiring each other to ask questions. That's definitely one. How do I get people back? And that gets bound up for us in the question of furlough too. So if I've got people on furlough, how do I bring them back? And then how do I get them into the office? So that definitely comes up a lot. How likely is anyone to complain if I haven't done everything, if I haven't followed the COVID secure guidelines that the government's put in place? And they're relatively clear, although there's always areas of interpretation. But, if I haven't done absolutely everything, what kind of penalty do I face? That's a really good question. And the chances of you getting found out are probably more likely than you might think, but it's not the HSE that's going to come and do the spot check. It's your own employees who are going to whistleblow on you and complain. So that's one that comes up a lot. Lots of anxiety around how can I protect people coming in, both on the sort of getting people to work and then getting them home from work safely. Can I take people's temperatures? What should I be doing? Should I be asking people to wear face masks or other things? Lots of anxiety we get. I mean, we obviously deal with the law, but we deal with a lot of the pragmatic business situations too. So lots of people worrying about productivity. So if I've got everybody staggering in at particular times and then staggering home at particular times, and I can't get everyone in the office in the same way as I used to. And as tech companies, we love a scrum, right? We love to be right in there, drawing on the walls and huddled up together, heads over computers and showing each other stuff. And that's part of the magic of what we do. So spacing everybody out, with people coming and going at different times is a challenge. What's going to happen to productivity? I've still got investments to, bring in. I've still got big corporate contracts that I want to do. How do I manage all of that? And I think interspersed with all of that is the very human factor of all of this. You've got, lots of people shielding still who don't have a choice about coming back to work, even if their employers want them to. You've got people with childcare. Previously it was homeschooling. Now we're approaching the school holidays, and with grandparents quite often shielding and not going on holiday in the same way that we did before. That's creating friction for staff who are suddenly juggling a huge amount more than they normally would do, even at this time of year. People with disabilities as well. What if I can't actually make my way around the building in the way that everybody else can? Am I suddenly going to feel at worst discriminated against? you know, even at best, really quite awkward or embarrassed or not able to do my job in the same way. So we get asked quite a broad spectrum of questions, but it all gets bound up in that kind of coming back safely, coming back productively, and doing the right thing by our staff, because, you know, startups are famous for that. People make the magic happen. There are invariably not that many of us. We matter to each other. We matter to the big objectives that we have. So there's a lot riding actually on getting back fast, but also keeping people together and culturally, you know, not doing anything that blows the whole ship apart.
Yes, I guess.
Sorry,
I was going to say, assuming that you have got teams who are wanting to bring back their employees into the office from a like innovation, collaboration, strategy meeting perspective, what suggestions do you have, Alex, first in terms of insurances that you can have in place to make sure that if these people are coming back in and going to an office and being in close quarters with each other, et cetera, you know, that would make that better for a founder, have that peace of mind?
So, I mean, first things first, if you have employees, if you have staff, or you have that employer-employee relationship, whether they're a freelancer or an employee, you have a legal duty to have employer's liability insurance anyway. So that's like the one that everyone should have if there are multiple directors or if there's employees in the business. It's a legal requirement. So if you don't have that, that would be the first thing I'd be looking to get if you're starting to bring staff back in. And I come back to the point I was making earlier on, which is now is a really good time to dig that policy out, because things may have changed since you first took out that insurance policy, and just having a look at, okay, well, what are we insured for? What are we like? What financials, what risks have been associated? What covers do we have? And let's just have a real review of this alongside our COVID risk assessment that we're going to do, and work out where the gaps are. And if there's not a legal requirement to have it like employer's liability, you can choose to have certain coverages, but get a real understanding as to, we've identified these risks, this is how we're going to manage it, and we're choosing whether to put the insurance in place to cover that or not. The one thing that links to employees' liability insurance is around the process of how you manage the employees and what you're doing to bring them back into work. So if someone was to get ill or sick or hurt as a result of coming back into work, and they were to allege negligence on the part of the business for that happening, I mean, Merlie, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think causation of when they actually got ill is going to be pretty hard to prove. But what they will be able to bring up is what processes were in place, how much did they contribute towards this. I mentioned I didn't want to come in, and I had to come in order to secure my job. I feel like otherwise I would be at risk if I wasn't doing these things, because the rest of the team is in. So there's lots of process that the management team is going to have to consider as to how they are going to manage the whole process of bringing that staff back into place. It's not just about point of contact, did someone get ill or not as a result of them coming in. It's how are we going to understand what we need to do? How are we going to show people that we've thought about these things and put the right protections in place? So as a management team, there are other insurances that can protect you if you make a mistake in what you're doing. So primarily directors and officers liability, corporate legal liability if health and safety executive get involved, or employment practices liability around the actual management of staff and any kind of dismissals or potential dismissals as a result of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I'd echo all of that. I think Alex hit the nail on the head. You have a legal responsibility to keep your employees safe. And despite the fact that the government's guidelines are called guidelines, the COVID secure guidelines, health and safety law requires you in any circumstances to keep your employees safe. So the guidelines effectively tell you how to do that, but you still have that duty. It's not an option. I think long and hard about what you really need, because, you know, while many of us actually, I am very keen to get back to the office, because offices aren't just places where we work, they're places that we come together. They have significance for all sorts of different reasons. And I know there are members of my team who are desperate to be office-based again, because that's what they enjoy. For many others, it's quite a traumatic consideration. And I think as management teams and as founders and CEOs especially, we have a duty to actually just sit back and reflect on what's really critical right now. We've had a quite significantly long period where many of us have been remote. I think when a large number of us need to come together, we might want to do half and half. You might want to split things. So sometimes certain people are in the office and certain people are remote, but you still come together virtually. The tech is great to do that. Other times you rotate. So there's all sorts of things that you can experiment with. I think one of the best things you can actually do is to ask your team what they want to do and to ask individuals and let them all air their particular views. Some will be happier talking about that in a wider forum. Others will be less inclined and want to do one-to-ones. But do take the temperature, because actually it's far easier to take decisions around how you do things, when you do things, and in what way you do things, if actually you're carrying your team with you. And then if certain people are uncomfortable, you know, you can find workarounds. Although technically as employers, our contracts typically say if you've got a good employment contract, you know, you will work in this location or somewhere else that we specify if it's reasonable. You don't want to be in a position where you're enforcing people back to work or enforcing particular working hours right now. It doesn't go down well. And it could actually store up a whole load of trouble outside of the sort of health and safety and employment law arena. So, you know, I think long and hard about what you really need, whether you really need to get everybody back in a particular way, whether you can stagger things. First, I think Alex is absolutely right. Insurance is vital in this area because we're all finding our way through it. As Michael said, this is a learning exercise for all of us. There will be occasions where we get stuff wrong. By communicating really well, by carrying the team with us, hopefully you are de-risking the chance of anyone bringing a claim or anyone, you know, trying to hold you to account financially for it, where you would be claiming on your insurance. But I think the more you sort of act with common sense and real empathy and consideration at this stage, even though it's difficult, even though it may have an impact on productivity, the easier it will be to ride this out. And ultimately, as soon as we can ride this out, we will want to be back to a position where we've got everybody firing on all cylinders, and growing as you know, the startup community is so good at doing.
Yeah,
When you're talking
communication is absolutely key there, Merlie. So I think that's what you're saying. Is like there needs to be communication between like the management team, the business, and the employees. Everyone's got to feel like they're making that decision.
Yeah, and it's a really good point actually, because the only time communication gets dangerous is when we then bring in the dreaded swear word of GDPR. So we get asked a lot of questions about, you know, if the person I sit next to normally suddenly phones in sick and they've got COVID symptoms, am I going to be told? And that it's something that's gone round around the houses with lots of the experts I've noticed in the last few months. That, you know, do you have to name names? And the advice actually is don't name names. If you find yourself in a situation where you have to alert a team and your workforce that there has been a COVID, somebody presenting with COVID positive symptoms, then, you know, you should, where you can, avoid naming names unless it's absolutely essential for you to identify an individual. That's quite a challenge actually for businesses to work through, but because the health of an individual is classified as sensitive data under the data protection laws in the UK and Europe, we have to treat it with even more security than we normally would. So while we might assume that we could simply say, oh, you know, Merlie's got a cough and we think she's got COVID and therefore everyone needs to go home, actually Merlie could, if I was being particularly difficult, then say, you've just compromised my personal data, and if I'm feeling particularly upset in any event and a bit traumatized by the whole experience, that sort of inflames a situation where you just don't want to be arguing with somebody in front of an employment tribunal about these things. And I think sadly there is such anxiety, there's such nervousness about job security, about what does this mean if I get COVID? Does that mean I could be furloughed and that means I'm going to be redundant? People start making these awful assumptions about what this means, and we're seeing examples of it everywhere. That just communicating sensibly, but not necessarily naming names when you communicate if there's been a COVID incident at work, is really important. TechHub had handled it brilliantly when we had the incident just before lockdown, where no names were named, but we knew there had been a scare in the building. And I thought it was really well done. Actually, it was a great fire drill for all of us to get into the whole lockdown mentality sensibly. But it was done really well. No names were named. We just knew there'd been something in the building that had happened.
Yeah, really clear communication. But going back to the other point, it's around documenting what you're doing. So this is the process we're going to adopt, right? So if someone is going to get ill, we do this first, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this. We're not going to name any names. Unless you have that already planned out, there's a larger tendency to just go with it and deal with it as you're doing it, and that's where those errors can come along. So I'm talking about, like, if you want to avoid those employment tribunals or getting into something whereby that's being questioned either by an employee, by a client, by the government, then just show your understanding of how you're going about it. Show the policies and procedures you put in place to manage anything, and then if anything happens, you've got something to point to, going, well, this is how we operate. We're showing that we're reasonable. We're managing this as a reasonable company. We're not doing anything extraordinary. And as a business, you don't have to manage every risk that's associated with COVID-19. I don't think the government's expecting you to have every risk handled. But what they're expecting to do is be reasonable for what you should be doing. And what you want to be able to do is demonstrate that.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on, Merlie, about insurance and that being like a pivotal role for it to play. And I do think it's a pivotal time to at least review what you've got and making a decision on it. So the insurance might be something that's pivotal, but it's more that have a think about it and work out whether it's right for you or not. But what I would also say is you can tell when something's becoming a bit riskier because the insurance industry starts tightening up what it's offering, how much it's offering it for, what price it's willing to give it for, and what the coverage. And that's what we're seeing happening in the market. So insurance as an industry, and I talk not about Hiscox, but as an industry, is tightening up certain verticals, certain industries, certain products, because they're expecting claims to come from that area in the future. So if you start seeing that happen, it's a telltale sign that perhaps there's a heightened risk here that we need to sort out. And D&O is one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we've noticed it also is quite an interesting trend amongst the investment community too. So investors are now saying, if you don't have a COVID slide in your pack, we're going to ask you a question. We'd like to see COVID slide. What have you done in response to COVID? And I had a very interesting conversation with somebody the other day. He said, well, we had a COVID slide because we took that advice. But all the questions we got asked weren't actually about what sort of commercial measures we'd taken. It was all about the team and the environment. And they really drilled down. And one of the questions that was asked was insurance. And another question asked was, what would you do? Because it was quite a small team. If one of the members of the team gets COVID and they get it quite seriously, do you have any kind of business continuity planning? Do you have key person insurance? Which is something we often forget about as well. If somebody critical who does an awful lot of the day-to-day work suddenly gets ill, have you got the insurance that means that you could relatively quickly afford to recruit somebody else to replace them, just so that you can keep the wheels on the cart while this is going on? So the fact that the insurers are picking up on this, and some of the lesser known, almost like contingency insurance products are coming in, is something that we're seeing more and more conversation about. We're certainly advising people to take a look at that quite significantly too. We might be through the worst of it right now, but if we have a second spike, it could mean that people who haven't had it right now may well have it. And as we all ease back into these environments, there is an increased risk we probably won't catch it in the workplace, because the workplace is pretty well set up for it these days. But it could be on the tube, during transport, pretty much anywhere else. So key person insurance is definitely another one that I would say to people, along with your COVID slide, and make sure your COVID slide has something about people and team protection and continuity. Make sure you've got that covered too.
And if I can, the only thing I would add to that is, if you're looking at the insurance, don't just take it completely blindly that you're covered for the things you think you're covered for. Yes, insurance brokers can help you. Ultimately, they're paid to help advise you what it is that you might need. If you are going direct to an insurer, you're taking more of that obligation on yourself. But in either of those circumstances, you can still end up with something that doesn't really cover what it is that you need. So COVID being a prime example, it would be highly unlikely you'll be able to have that covered within an illness, a health insurance, or a key person insurance policy, because it's a known thing now. You can protect against the next unknown thing that's coming, but for this thing, you might have trouble with. So I would just say it's worth looking at, and we've seen things like in the directors and officers insurance market, people putting like blanket COVID-19 exclusions. So if a business was to go insolvent as a result of COVID-19, then actually the policy wouldn't respond, which is exactly what you're going to need it for. So again, just because you have it in name doesn't necessarily mean that you've got the cover that you think you're buying. So just making sure that you're spending that time, get the experts in, help you have a look at what it is that you've got there, making sure that it's fit for purpose.
Yeah, and it's, I don't know about you, Alex, I sort of shy away from reading most of our insurance policies because they are hundreds of pages long.
What do you mean, Merlie? What do you mean?
Awful. People complain about lawyers, but seriously. But no, actually having that expert advice, having somebody really sit down and say, this is what's included, this is what's not included, is really important. And I think, you know, whether members are with Hiscox or not, using you as a sounding board to say, is this the kind of thing you'd expect to be covered, is actually really, really important. I know when we first went through insurance, I asked a friend of ours who knew a lot more about insurance than I did, does this look reasonable? Because I don't know what I don't know, so I don't know what I should expect to be covered. I don't know what a good insurance deal looks like. And you don't necessarily get that from the person you immediately buy it for because they're in sales mode. So I think that sort of sounding board role that I know you play an awful lot is really important right now. You know, not many of us, even if we do have the time to read hundreds of pages of policy, would get to the end of it and think, yeah, okay, that sounds decent, or I know what I've got. So it is really important that you get good advice from somebody who really does, you know, is going to give you an impartial and a trusted view.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. Just carve out some time to have a look is what I would say. And if you can manage it yourself, then great. If not, then there are loads of people that can help. Yeah,
and look, you know, whether it's investors, whether it's banks, whether it's customers, when you go through procurement processes, many of us are enterprise facing, all of these, and you know, talent, frankly, you know, your top CTOs and your top C-suite execs that you want to bring in to help you scale up, you know, they're all going to expect you to have these boxes ticked. They're going to expect you to cover them with D&O. They're going to expect you to have key person in case somebody that they've come in to work alongside who they feel inspired by suddenly, you know, is out of the business for a particular period of time. So having your foundations covered with the sort of baseline insurance package, and you know, Alex, I think it might be really helpful for people just to know what the sort of core essentials are, and then at what stage we should be scaling up our sort of insurance cover, is really helpful, so that you know you're not going to miss a trick, and you're not then going to be scrambling around in the middle of an RFP or you know, investor due diligence, looking like you're not competent as a management team because you've missed something really critical, or where still somebody suddenly got a claim against you.
Well, yeah. So if anybody does want to do that, that's exactly what we do. So like, just pick out some time. I mean, Michael, I was going to ask a question of you. It's like, what? I might be picking on you as TechHub, but it's more like, what are you doing in regards to like clients that are coming in? So customers of TechHub, people that have a space at TechHub that want to come back into the site, and you've got some people back there already. Obviously, they've got a duty of care to their employees or the people that they're working with. You've got a duty of care to them and the other people. How is there a working together process so you can show people what it is you're doing, and they can pass that on to their employee? How does that process work when you're dealing with people coming back?
I think for us, the most important thing is the sign back form we've created. Just a Google. It's very basic. It takes just a couple of moments, and they basically just fill out where they have, if they have had any travel recently, if they're showing any symptoms, if they have shown any symptoms, how often they are looking at returning to the space, and so we can then we then get an idea and a view of numbers of attendance, because at the moment it's fluctuated quite a lot. So that is probably the best tool for us in terms of guests and visitors on the comms piece that we sent out most recently. We've asked our members that they minimize the amount of external guests that they have coming into the space, just to minimize that risk at this stage. I think it just goes back to so it's adapting. The situation is adapting every day and changing, and so that's, as TechHub, we are trying to adapt our situation and reviewing it so frequently that we can keep up to date with supporting our community. And we're really lucky at TechHub, as you both all three of you know, we have a great community and everyone is really entwined with each other, and so there's that massive support network which I'm very grateful for. Sorry, and I definitely think that plays a massive part in our success, if you like, here at.
Yeah, because the thing that I would be thinking about, I think I'd be much happier to come into TechHub than most other places, on the basis that, like, I know that you will be dealing with people coming back from a wide range of businesses. You have all the processes nailed. You have the experience. You know exactly how it should be set out, and you're coming into an environment that is therefore it's used to having a wide variety of businesses coming from all over, coming into the site, and how you should go about managing that space. Whereas perhaps in other offices or whatever, you may not have that same expertise. You may not have had that same experience over the last 2 months, 3 months, or whatever it may be, to be in that position to have that same I don't know, security that the right things have been thought about. So that's the reason why I mentioned it. It's just that I'm sure there's loads of stuff you can do to help members that are coming back that maybe have 4 or 5 employees, that you can help pass on and go, well, this is how we are managing. This is how you should feel comfortable about it. You can pass this on to your team. And from a management team perspective of that business, you're putting a little tick in the box anyway, going, well, I'm at TechHub. They're managing 80% of what I need to do here already. And then I'm just managing the last 20% as to, okay, well, what's travel look like, making sure I'm not discriminating against anyone in my team, making sure I'm communicating, making sure I'm showing what I'm doing. But I've got TechHub sitting behind me as a facility manager, managing the actual space that we're in.
I think the independence of TechHub helps as well. So you've got that sort of overlord is the wrong word to use, because you're anything but as a team. But I think one of the anxieties that we've had people ask, not about TechHub, I might add, is I'm in a co-work environment, but what happens if, I do everything I can and I keep my team safe and we're following the guidelines, but the business next door to us doesn't, and then puts my team at risk? What do I do? And I think the great thing about the TechHub community is you've got this sort of sense of vigilance. Michael, you said you're sort of taking it day by day and watching how things play out. So you will spot, probably inadvertent as opposed to deliberate, risky behavior, but it can be nipped in the bud. People can be, quietly advised. And I think that gives great assurance too. I think there is real anxiety across the sort of startup community, particularly when it comes to the safety of some co-works and how seriously their management is taking it. Because you can't simply put as you guys know very well, hand sanitizers in the odd screen up a one-way system and say, right, job done. And we'll open up and shut up at the end of the day. If we're 24 hours, see ya. We'll sort of be somewhere remote. So I think the fact that you have got this constant vigilance and that you are sort of curating the community and guiding us and doing that stuff is really important, actually. And it's a lot of why the community trusts you.
Yeah, as Merlie, you mentioned earlier, we had a bit of a scare where someone had COVID positive symptoms at the beginning of March. And the good thing about being part of a community like TechHub is that we have access to be able to contact everybody, not only all of the members, but everybody that come into the building over the last few days, which means that we have our own kind of track and trace type system. So we can contact people if something goes wrong. We know who's in the building on what day because they filled out that form that Michael mentioned. We know, well, we urge people who have any symptoms to let us know so that we can be as vigilant and to contact people. And we have the means to do that, which is great. I thought that it would be a good time to ask one of the questions because it links quite well to what we're talking about right now, which is about risk assessment. And the risk assessment question doesn't necessarily mention co-working spaces, but it would be interested to get an answer. So the question is, do you need to have a risk assessment? Does every business need to have their own risk assessment? And is that a legal requirement? But then I was also wondering if either of you know, if you do have someone based in a co-working space, whether there's a different answer if they're in a space that someone else is managing versus if they're in a space that they are in control of.
I'm happy to take first watch on this, Alex, but I know you'll have thoughts on this too. Yeah, as an employer, you have a legal duty to make an assessment to keep your employees safe. This is an incident where you should be making a risk assessment. If you're a business above a particular size, then you actually have to publish your risk assessment on your website, and the government's COVID secure guidelines are very clear on that. There's a lot of information on Farillio. In fact, if you want a quick sort of checklist risk assessment that takes you through the pragmatic steps, then go and get it off Farillio too, because we've worked with our health and safety experts, Lighthouse, who are phenomenal, and they've got YouTube videos, sort of how-to videos on that, but they've also given us one of their assessment guidelines, and that includes also how you look at people coming onto your site as well. So not so much an issue for our type of business, but if you're in a slightly larger business, or in a business that shares responsibility for lift maintenance and things like this, so Purdy, Michael, it might be of interest to you, then you've got contractors that you know by law you have to let on site, because lifts have to be maintained within particular timeframes by law, and there are things that you can do to make sure that the contractors coming on site are also giving you assurance that they're COVID secure. But yeah, it isn't something you can escape. You don't have to go to town on this. A lot of the assessment, actually, you can see this from the form, is real common sense. But you have a legal duty to keep your employees safe. You can't really avoid that. And, you know, frankly, it's not worth trying to avoid it, because if your employees don't feel safe, they're going to be the people who pull the triggers.
And coming back to your earlier point, Merlie, you should, like, in that communication piece, like, you should be sharing those risk assessments with your staff, right? So what better way to get them on side with what you're doing than to be sharing that information with them, saying, this is what we're doing, how we're going about it. Is everyone on board with this? Is everyone happy with it? You got any comments that you'd like to add? We'd love to hear from you, so we can make some changes around what it is that you would feel uncomfortable about. So taking that framework, and I'm sure you've got examples and other things that you've got there to have, like, if you haven't, then there's stuff on the government websites around this is what it can look like and how you should put it, what you should put in. But it will be something like our increased number of people in the office. We need to have, therefore, we need to clean more regularly on the basis of this. We're going to have to stagger our shifts. We need to have more hand sanitizer. We encourage people to bring their food into work. But ultimately, it's still like work from home if you can. If you can't, then we'll need to make we'll make arrangements.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, Alex, you hit the nail on the head. At the risk of sounding like I'm very mercenary about these things, these are the questions that customers, big customers, that investors are asking. How did you respond? What did you do? How did you keep people safe? Are you compliant with the government guidelines? And we're seeing people being asked this all the time. You will be expected to show it. And the reason these questions are being asked is not so much that investors fear that there might be employment tribunal actions or something else that might crop up, or an insurance claim that they need to be aware of in a company that they're interested in investing. They're also asking it because culture has become such a big thing. Are you a company that actually looks after its culture and that looks after its team and that is capable of competently scaling up? A lot of this comes down to a real fascination in culture. And, you know, the biggest thing you can do to kill your culture is not look after your staff in times of real drama and trauma and need. And this is one of those moments.
100% agree. Yeah. From an insurance angle, there's not much more to really add to it. I think you just need to be demonstrating that, again, you're doing what you need to be doing. Am I right in thinking if you've got a team of less than 5 people, you don't necessarily have to write everything down in regards to what you're doing about stuff, but it's still recommended that you do, so you've got something to point to. So again, if you're at that smaller end, don't think you've got this big operation that you've got to go through. It should be fairly straightforward, especially with the stuff you're going to have on site and Farillio. That you're going to have that information to hand, where it's just a simple walkthrough as to what you need to think about. It's worth going through and just documenting something.
Yeah, it is. Do you know, it's a really good question, this one, actually, that Purdy's raised, because when we first got our first real office as a team at TechHub, I actually didn't know. It was our finance director who said to me, you know, well, we need a first aid kit and we need a health and safety poster and we've got to do all of these things. And I was like, we do? But don't TechHub do this? You know, TechHub are amazing. Surely we've ticked that box already. And she was like, no, you're an independent business on your own. So yes, you know, they get you 80% of the way there and you're very lucky in that sense, but you are legally responsible for making sure that you've ticked all the boxes and you've done the assessments. So yes, and I think to your point about if you're less than 5, you don't have to write it all down. That's absolutely true. But the reality is you soon get beyond 5, and it's not something that you remember in the heady moments of recruiting new people and being excited. Oh, yes, I now need to write my health and safety policy. And again, the reality is that most staff will expect you to have a staff handbook from the minute that you start employing people, and the health and safety policy is one of those kind of essential starter documents that you should have in there. It ultimately, health and safety, and I really shouldn't say this and I'll get told off by Lighthouse, but there's not a lot to health and safety. It's mostly common sense. And if it's common sense mixed with really good communication, you shouldn't be nervous about it. It's not one of those like GDPR where it takes a lot more head scratching.
One thing I would quickly add there, if I can, Merlie, is we're starting to see there's a little bit of precautionary underwriting going on around some health and safety consultants that have either pivoted from what they were normally doing into health and safety, or have started a company as a result of what's going on at the moment. And it's just being a bit more cautious with those companies as do they really have the experience and the expertise that you need if you're utilizing them to do the assessments, or like as opposed to like accessing Lighthouse or someone else through yourself, going, we know them, we've vetted them, they're best in class, use this. You might end up paying a little bit more, but you're going to end up getting something that's actually worthwhile, because if you're using one of the other companies that have run to it, you don't really know what you're going to get. And at the end of the day, if something was to happen, that's on you. That's your decision as a management team that you've used them. So again, you're putting yourself at risk by doing that.
Yeah, we took a long time to find Lighthouse, actually. And it became a much bigger deal for Farillio than I thought it would be, because I wanted people who weren't doing an upsell and who really did this day in, day out, up and down the country, which they do. But again, if people have got questions, there is a speak to an advisor service that Lighthouse administer on our site, and you can pay as you go and get some really quick expert advice and support. So you can get quite a lot for not a little to just cover off some of these things as well. It's absolutely worth doing. I learn stuff every time I go there. I'm regularly wandering around pubs and restaurants, filming them while they point out, where the toilet is a bit of a hazard, and where a chopping board is not quite where it should be, because we all learn from that stuff, right? But we chose them for that very reason. They know the stuff. They're not trying to upsell you. And they've been doing it a long time. And I think we've seen it not just with health and safety recently, Alex. It's interesting you say that. We're seeing it with food safety too. People going out saying, oh, well, we can advise you. And it's particularly acute right now because you've got pubs who've converted to takeaways, and the rules have been slightly relaxed around that, but they need proper guidance, and they're being given ticks in the boxes, and now the local authorities are going around and saying that's not actually FSA standard. So it is, if you're taking advice, and particularly if you're paying for that advice, do check out the credentials of the people who are giving it.
Yeah, I just want to say again, if the insurance industry isn't getting nervous about something and making changes to the way we go about doing something, then again, that should be an indicator that there is actually risk involved in that, and we're trying to manage that ourselves. So so just be aware more than anything. Oh, you've got a visitor, Merlie.
Oh, yeah.
You're on TV. I think that's why it says filming outside, Bob. Oh, if you're really embarrassed. But thanks for coordinating with me. Bless. It'll be something to do with Minecraft.
One of the things you talked about at the beginning, Merlie, was about this kind of anxiety stuff. And do you get people to wear face masks, and do you do temperature checks? And what other things can you or should you be doing? Which I
think we might have lost Paddy.
I think we've just lost her, yeah.
No.
She might pop back.
I think it was, what else can you do? I think it very much depends on what you're planning to do and how many people you're planning to pull back. Paddy, are you back?
I'm back.
We didn't hear the end of the question.
Yeah, I was going to.
Oh no.
Oh.
We've lost her.
Oh, we jinxed it again.
Oh no, that's awful. I think a lot of it is, what else can you do? Should you be taking temperatures? Should you be wearing masks? It all comes down to common sense and the comfort of your own team. and the circumstances you work in. I mean, we have an 18-person office, so we knew fairly early on that we were going to be changing the way we worked for quite some time to come, because the reality, particularly when you've got a lot of people remote and they're traveling through very crowded public transport, and there are a lot of families involved in this, so school stop and start times, all of these things to be coordinated. I think this comes back to the point that we were talking about earlier, which is just sit down with the people who are affected. If you've got a very large team, sit down with the managers. If you're a small team like us, then get the 50 people on the call and thrash it out. And we went through the Lighthouse assessment together, just to make sure that everybody kind of knew and everybody could make suggestions. And we had lots of questions asked, like, should we take our temperatures and report it on the WhatsApp channel that we've got every morning? And, should we come in and wear masks? And then we have various people who are allergic to things. But I think flushing it all out actually enables every single person to have a say in it. The government guidelines are quite good. Actually, they're really supportive too, but you've sort of got to work your way through the everyday. What we did is we worked through everybody's day logically together. So we looked at, what time is everybody coming in? What happens when they reach the front door? What is our plan? What are we going to do if certain things happen? So that we gave everybody that kind of assurance of, can we actually get everybody back in a particular way that works for everyone else? And then we examined that. So, it sounds like it was a very long discussion. Actually, it wasn't a particularly long discussion, but it was a really helpful discussion, and just kind of all of us deciding what it was that we felt we needed to do, and then ticking off what we knew we needed to do as far as the government was concerned. But I think people have very different views. There's lots of conspiracy theories out there as well. Actually talking it through and working out what's real and what's not, but might be a good suggestion, is just a really helpful way of getting everybody comfortable with the idea of coming back. There's a lot of people who are reaching out to us at the moment as employees who are really worried about coming back. And the first thing we're saying is, have you told anybody? Because invariably they actually haven't told anybody, but they're reaching out to us as a third party because I think we feel a bit independent. But the reality is the person who can fix that anxiety best is ideally your employer, because they can talk you through everything that's going on. And, many of them don't have the luxury of a Michael and a Purdy and a Margaret Ann to sort of get hold of and talk to. They're not working in these kinds of environments, but there is real anxiety. So the more you sort of bring people in, the better able you are to decide as a business how you're going to tackle certain things and to learn from others. There's lots of good ideas out there that other people are doing. And I think the great thing, again, about community and TechHub is that people get the opportunity to share ideas. Well, we're doing it this way. I hadn't thought about that. That's really good.
There's a couple of things there that I was going to quickly touch on, which was, sorry, Margaret Ann, was there?
Oh, no, please go ahead.
It was so the first one was around like planning for this. So even if you're not thinking about bringing stuff back today or tomorrow or next week, the idea, I think what we're trying to say is start planning for that now. Get people's views on it. Even if you're thinking about October, November, you can't just do this overnight. You have to start strategizing what you're going to do. You should be checking in on people anyway in their working from home environment. And I imagine most of these teams are going to be speaking to each other 3-4 times a week anyway, but it's 3-4 times a day anyway. But it's more the making sure you're checking in, not only from like their work perspective, but their physical and mental state from where they're working as well, because there is this prolonged working from home element. So even if you're not planning on bringing people back to the office, if working from home is going to be a more prolonged thing, then there's going to be more onus on you, the employer, to do the right checks on those, to do the right working from home checks, safety checks, that they've got the right seat, that they've got the right desk, they've got the right equipment. All of that stuff is going to become more onus on you as well. So what I would say is, even if you're thinking about October, November, use the Farillio site, get the insight and start planning for it. Start thinking about how you're going to bring it together, whether you're going to have people working from home, in the office, or a mixture of the both, because that's what you're going to have to start thinking about.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, home working policies are something that we've only ever really started talking about in the last few years. And I think as a tech community, we've talked about remote working and home working a lot more because we tend to be much more nomadic and agile. But home working policies now are becoming really important for businesses to have. So how does it work when you're out of an office environment? And that will cover elements like cyber security, when you're using particular kit, when you're not using particular kit, how you're patching in, all the way through to actually mental health and well-being. And again, mental health and well-being comes into this in a bigger way than I think we've ever estimated before. So we're seeing increased demand, not just for home working policies, but also mental health and well-being policies, because the mental cost of actually working remotely and the sort of exhaustion that comes with constant Zoom, Skype, Teams calls, because we're meeting a lot more, we're on a lot more, we're not getting up, walking around, going to meetings, having the water cooler conversations. It's the small things actually that really start to wear people down. So, you know, it's not just health and safety you need to think about in terms of getting people back, it's actually the mental well-being of those individuals that we can't leave behind either.
That's a good point, Merlie. And sorry, everyone. Purdy's just having a few YouTube streaming problems, so we switched places. But we have a question from the YouTube comments. I know we're wrapping up shortly. There's one. What are key things to look for in an insurance contract? Oh, and then one other question. Is there anything to bear in mind about bringing people back from furlough?
I'll tell you what, I'll take the insurance and you take the furlough.
Neatly done. I was going to give furlough to Michael.
So from an insurance aspect, things that you should be checking is, like, first, I use it at the moment to do the whole check, as I said before. Like, don't just look at it from an employer's liability perspective. Do the whole check through the business, because we've talked about like company culture and engaging with your employees really a lot in this conversation. But some of the things that Merlie's been talking about, which is dealing with clients, dealing with investors, all the good things that might happen as a result of everything else coming from this, they're going to want to know what you've done, how you've managed it. So think about it from that perspective. But also the insurance is also going to cover you from the worst case scenario, things that might happen, which is, I don't know, like someone gets ill and we have to deal with it from an employment perspective, or even worse, like we run out of fund, we run out of money, we have to lay people off. Then as a result of that, we then have to have complications regarding them bringing actions against us, or the investors bringing action against us around how we've managed the process, how we've managed their money as a result of everything that's going on. So insurance can be used in all of those different areas. So we've talked nicely about the employee area, but just remember there are bigger things also to consider as well. What you'll be looking at is, first of all, do you have what you're legally required to have? So employer's liability. Are you covered for the business entity that you need to be covered for? Is all your information correct, like your financials, turnover, payroll, business activities? If any of these are incorrect or inaccurate in some way, then you are risking the insurer at point of claim claiming that they wouldn't have covered you in that way, and therefore putting the potential payment that you would get as a result of an insurance claim at risk as well. And then I would be looking at things like, so public liability, if you're dealing with the public now. So if you're looking to deal with, if you're looking at something might happen as a result of the public dealing with us, and we then were to pass on an illness to them, public liability insurance will cover you from a bodily injury, illness, property damage perspective. And then directors and officers liability or management liability around the management team and how you're dealing with that, with running the company. As a director, an officer, or someone in charge of a business, you owe a fiduciary duty to the business to perform your role correctly. If you are wrongful, they use wrongful as the word as opposed to negligent in the wording, but if you're wrongful in what you've done or how you've used money or the process you put in place, then you're personally liable. It's not limited like the businesses from a financial perspective. Your personal wealth is at risk, and if they come after you personally, then that's what the directors and officers insurance is going to do to protect you. So they're the type of things that I would be looking at as a straight off right now. They're good things to be considering. I would also kick the tires on your professional indemnity. So tech companies, generally speaking, will be doing services for third parties or customers. You will have a breach of contract type professional indemnity policy. And in that instance, when there are stress staff or you are down on numbers and you don't have enough people to cover the workload as a result of everything that's going on with COVID, more mistakes can happen. And as a result of those more mistakes, there may be a knock-on effect to customers or clients, and professional indemnity is what's going to protect the business in that instance. So again, an extra life in that area is making sure that is tied down. And then the other thing we've seen is people moving to more remote working has seen a huge jump in cybercrime. So more attacks on businesses, more attacks at points where it's more vulnerable, like there's a lot of change going on. When there's change, there's more like there's a lot of ambiguity when it comes to employees working from home that can be used against them. So we've just seen a huge spike in kind of cybercrime activity, making sure that you understand how you're managing like the data or the processes that you have online through a cyber insurance policy may also be a benefit too. So I appreciate that. I've spoken a lot, but if anyone wants to do it more bespoke to them, then come speak to me.
No, those are really great points, especially on the cybercrime. I know we're at time, but really quickly, Merlie, do you want to touch on the furlough question?
Yeah, it's a massive arena. Was the question how to bring somebody back from furlough?
I believe so. It was, is there anything to bear in mind about bringing people back from furlough? And also, I know you have a lot of great content out there. So if you have anything that would be helpful for the audience, we can always link to that afterwards.
Sure. I mean, there's plenty of stuff, and it's on the blog site. So the blog area of Farillio, so it's all public facing. If you're not a member, you can sign in and you can consume the blogs too. We do have a letter that you can use as well if you're bringing your staff back from furlough that enables you to bring them back, and it gives you all the different variations of how you might want to bring them back. And I think that's the big question, you know, how do you want to bring them back? Are you bringing somebody back at a particular point in time? And it's up to you now how soon you bring them back. If they're already on furlough, you can keep them on full furlough for up to the end of October, or you can do the sort of flexible furlough, start having people sort of part-time coming back and you're paying them normal wages for the hours that they are in the business, and then you can claim under the furlough scheme for the time that they are not, and you continue to have them on furlough. But you can now, as of the 1st of July, have them on this sort of flexible 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You can rotate your staff, so provided people have been on furlough at some point during the period and before the 10th of June, then you could bring people back for 3 weeks and then refurlough them. Again, as the time moves on, the furlough scheme for employers becomes less, you know, financially supportive, but employees right the way throughout the whole period up until the end of October are still entitled to that same 80% of salary subject to that minimum cap. There are alternatives to furlough that you may want to consider. Again, we go through them on the site. They carry various degrees of risk, but we're seeing people experiment with a number of those. Everyone's trying to avoid redundancy where they can, but at the point in time where you can see that that almost becomes unavoidable, your directors and officers responsibilities do require you to start thinking about those. So if you know that there isn't looking like there is light at the end of the tunnel for a particular role, or a particular team or branch, then, you know, bear in mind that just because you've got somebody on furlough doesn't mean that you can just dismiss the need to go through a redundancy process. It might be a shortened one, but you can't purely say you've been furloughed, therefore I can make you redundant, because that's discrimination. So there are some finer points of detail. The site can walk you through all that. We're actually just about to shoot another video on some of this stuff out of some of the case studies that we've been working with people on, just to make sure that people don't trip up. There are some quite risky strategies that we've seen people take on top of just laying people off unpaid, which, if you know, you find that furlough doesn't work anymore, is a strategy. Furlough was designed to avoid that, so hopefully nobody is doing that. They are instead putting people on furlough or flexible furlough. We've seen people literally terminate contracts and then put somebody on a completely different contract with much shortened hours, or a slightly different job description. There is risk involved in that, probably less risk in these times than there would normally be because people are less inclined to complain, but that is quite a high risk strategy to use. It really depends. I would say if you're bringing people back and you want to know what your options are, go look at the template on Farillio, which is behind the firewall sadly, but you can trial it and get it without paying for 7 days if you're desperate for it right now. That will talk you through the options. I think where it gets risky is if you are bringing them back on different terms. So if you want to bring people back, but you want to bring them back on a 4-day week when they were a 5-day week before, and there are salary ramifications and working hours ramifications, that's a fundamental change to employment terms. So you are going to have to agree those with the employee. Very few employees would probably argue with this if it means they've got job security and continuity, but technically by law you do have to do that. So just be aware that bringing them back doesn't mean that you can suddenly change their terms. You've still got to go through that process. We are seeing a few people trip up on that. That's one that you can easily avoid. And again, the whole communication really supports this entire process. I'm sorry, it's a massive topic. I feel like I'm not really doing it enough justice, but I hope that helped.
Really great information. And we'll, if you send us that link, we'll definitely send it out for everybody as well.
Will do.
If you're a Hiscox customer, I was just going to say, if you're a Hiscox customer, either through a broker or directly, and you want to get behind the paywall of Farillio, then actually there's some free access for
go Alex's way.
Yeah, there are Hiscox customers you can actually get behind the paywall because there's a combo there. But yeah, whether you're broker or direct, you can access that. So go speak to us.
Yeah, and I think, am I right in saying, Alex, that if you go via Hiscox to get to Farillio, you also get the advantage of the unlimited 24/7 legal and tax helpline too? I think that gets built in with your offering, or does it not?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. Well, it might do, and that would help even more. Otherwise, I'm happy to point you in any direction that need be. Reach out over Intercom and I'll help too. But yeah, Alex has got a great deal actually on Farillio as well. But you should be able to get in on the trial and grab what you need immediately in any event if you're desperate for this stuff. But do make sure, and Alex said it earlier, document what you're doing, communicate really well. And that's the best way to manage risk around this whole episode.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Alex, Michael, and Merlie. It was fantastic. I hope everyone at home watching got a lot of value out of it. Again, we'll send out the email with all this information tomorrow. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark Ann. Bye.